So just a quick background of us. So I myself is Ram. I have around 20+ years experience in architecture, product development, and I'm more from a development background, not from a QA background. But last 10 years, I'm running a company where we do product development as a service. And then I have seen one of the pain areas where the test automation is one of the challenging thing for most of the things. Like, yeah, they're starting doing it. Is it working? Yes, it is working. But is it doing enough? Is it being efficient? Is it cost effective? And these questions are not being answered. And so I started digging into it, started with a small framework. Now we have grown it into a full-scale product where now we bring test automation onto the cloud just on a browser based. So you'll be able to create the tests, you'll be able to do all the necessary from automation to automation execution, test case management, test data management, and test execution, all of it in one platform. We try to so current automation tools are focused more on automation engineer specific, but that's where we want to break that barrier and say, look, we have to just cover the complete spectrum or ecosystem of the test automation. And that's where we built a product which covers the complete spectrum of it.
Right, what do you mean by complete spectrum?
From the test automation ecosystem, right? So it's not just about building scripts. Most of the tools today, they help you in developing the test automation scripts. But then again, there is a test data management, test case management, test execution. All that is again, you need different skills to bring all those things together. Now we brought everything into one place, and now we are obviously the automation should not be a burden for the companies. So it should be more given to the QA engineers. So because they are the end of the day subject matter experts, and they should be having the control on the automation. So that's why we simplified all that automation thing into a simple data-driven approach, brought onto cloud. So they'll do number of things. Yeah, so yeah, a lot of features specifically from and if you're looking at an automation engineer's perspective, our product will be loved by them because they have seen in and out of the challenges, and that's pretty much addresses that. Yeah, so we cautiously took the approach of not a complete no-code approach. So we took a low-code approach where you still have to put a little bit of script. That's only to scale up your more challenging issues. Then the automation challenges itself. Anything you want to do something outside the box, then you need to have that flexibility as well. Hence, we left it as a low-code. And so. Yeah, so that's a little bit background on us. So now the reason why we reach out to someone like you who's expertise in the field is if you're embarking on an automation journey, what would you look to see in a tool? What will be your evaluation criteria? And those kind of things, like, yeah, I just want to know from you, like industry experts like you, who is a QA evangelist, so who does a lot of blogging and all those things. I've seen it. So yeah, so just want to hear from you some of the things that what you will have in mind that will address. So obviously we want to bring those kind of things into our product to simplify those particular address those concerns that you may have.
I kind of feel like the trouble with the test automation space is that it's so many tools. Like right. There's so many people giving little bits and pieces, and it's hard for people to understand what you can do with things. Like you, for example, now mentioned your tool and said web, but is it web only? Do you have also other things there? Yeah.
No, that's the beauty of it, right? We have the API, mobile, desktop, API, database as well. So you can connect to the database.
Yeah, usually you do. That's what I kind of like. But again, understanding what each of these have and what's the difference between kind of what you say about it, what you can actually do about it, and learnability and all of that stuff. That's really difficult for people to grasp in general.
Correct. Yeah.
And a lot of tools available.
Yeah. Okay, saying that, I think, yeah, let's start few questions that I think Syed already shared. So Syed is also here in the call, I think. Syed, hey, Syed.
Hi, Ram. Hi, Maaret.
Yeah,
hello.
so yeah. Yeah, we just introduced ourselves to each other, I think. Yeah, and just I also started the recording session of this. So I'm going to ask a few questions to Maaret and see how it goes. Yeah. Okay. Can I start, Maaret?
Sure.
Yeah, cool. Yeah, cool. Right. First, I would like to ask you, because you're having tons of experience as a QA in the QA practice and QA manager. You worked as a QA manager in many organizations. So just want to understand, what do you expect from a test automation? In what will be your top 5 things that you look at? See, that's a must-have kind of things in your test automation.
I have really like a must-have is 2 things. One is it needs to do real work. So results matter. Like, does it actually provide us results? That's one of the things. And the other one is kind of the cost and the maintainability aspect of it.
Correct.
So, but it links to the results. So I find myself kind of looking at how it grows and how much time having it around, how much time does it take for us when we have it around. But I can very easily make a list of 100 things as well on what I expect, and it's not necessarily so easy to kind of summarize that.
Yeah. Yeah. So when you said results matters, right? So obviously there is a lot of effort is also needed to put the automation right. I mean, like with my experience, like test automation tools are there. There's a lot of wonderful features and everything, but there's a lot of onus on the test automation architect as well. So who designs it in a way that it is scalable for the future needs.
So for me, it's more on the side of, we have this kind of split between developers and QA people. And it usually is considered so that QA people do this test automation and developers do this, unit and component testing, whatever you want to call it. Like, it's a lower level thing, meaning it's more programming oriented, and in ways it's limited by its power, but it's also more powerful in some ways. And since we have these 2 groups split, we can't actually analyze the things we need to test to the right level, but we keep kind of repeating the same things. And sometimes we over test on the high level automation on things we could do on the unit level. So I think a lot of the trouble we have these days is for the lack of collaboration and the lack of understanding between the 2 parties within even the same team.
Right. Yeah, I think it's down to, because the approaches are totally different, right? Whereas someone using
actually, they're not that different, because again, like, I've just spent this week a relevant amount of my time in reviewing some of the unit tests and reviewing some of the coverage for, basically, I want to see if we are getting to the results with the test automation that we have right now in my team. And for me, kind of like the things that I notice we're missing, I can pinpoint them into unit tests very easily.
Right.
Most of them, almost like 90% of them, I can pinpoint that I can actually test these in unit tests. And this is particularly easy now because we are kind of getting started with the new project, and there's not so much of history and not so much of code base yet. So I actually have all those options available to me, and people can change the architectures also to make it testable on the unit level.
Right.
So again, it's a lot of this is kind of like depends on what kind of history we have ended up building, and are we willing to change that history even today when we're going into implementing automation. And sometimes it's actually better use of time to just rewrite a piece in a more modern technology. You don't need to rewrite the whole thing. You maybe need to only rewrite the interfacing technology. Like right now, one of my projects is very old, like VB and .NET and all kinds of Windows-based technologies. And the drivers on that space are not so good as on the web space. And it's probably actually cheaper for us to rewrite some of the GUIs. Absolutely. Without writing the underlying logic and then automating on top of the web user interface, than living with there's about 20 different generations of Windows technologies that we would need to interface with. Okay. So for me, my problem is kind of like, we are always looking at this as a separate problem. And I think it's a problem of how we organize the whole software development. And we are doing too much of the wrong thing. That's my core problem right now with the test automation space.
Understand. Yeah. Right. Moving on. Right. As a QA manager, what I have seen is most likely a QA manager is also takes the lead in doing the test automation. So if the company starts the test automation, it comes from obviously most of the ownership comes from a QA manager who may not be completely from an automation background, but they'll be doing. So when you adapt to kind of things, so what kind of role that you want to play in that automation journey? Is it like you want to get your hands on and learn and do it, or you say, okay, this is my spec, you just go and automate and come back?
So it really depends on the scale I have to do it. It's not so much of my personal preference necessarily. It's just the fact that in a full week of work, there's some things I can do hands-on myself, and other things where I have no other choice but to scale it. I need to trust people in completing smaller bits. And with the smaller bits, usually it's also kind of like building the trust, kind of like, let's agree this is the first thing you will do. This is the first thing we will, show. And it's always a negotiation. It's not just me telling what they need to do. It's also them saying what they think they would need to do and having that dialogue over there.
Yeah.
But yeah, I do write hands-on myself as well.
Good. That's good. Good. Yeah. So you do as an in general, if you're asking a QA managers, so how to what extent they involve in the test automation strategy and design kind of stuff?
I'm quite heavily involved in that, but then again, it really depends on the person and it depends on the project. So if I have someone else who is already very capable at that, then it's more like I'm involved in saying good job and continue.
Yeah. True. True. Right. So now moving to the next question. So there's a number of automation tools in the market today, and there's a different approaches. Someone says now it's a AI based. Someone says we do everything. And there's a different. Some companies I say so they understand the user journeys automatically by themselves and do automatically reproduce these tests. So what kind of tools that you look at?
I am looking at. Well, you had this in the questions that you send in advance. You had this word for kind of like tailor-made or something like that, kind of like you self-built your own framework. But it feels like we don't actually self-build it because the blocks already exist. Like you take the same blocks in different places, and only the scripts are things you need to build yourself. Which of the tools in that particular ecosystem we end up taking into use first and how we grow that so that people can learn it in smaller steps so that they can, do useful things, but also understand what they're building, because it's usually a learning journey rather than having a ready-made tool. That's what matters much more. But it's a Python ecosystem.
Yeah, so there's some tools like no code kind of things, right? There's a record and play kind of thing. So do you prefer those kind of things? Obviously, they give a quick, right? No, you don't. Okay, okay.
I use them occasionally for training purposes, but we have always thrown them out very quickly.
Okay. And obviously now AI is one of the buzzword in the industry today. How do you see the role of an AI in the testing and test automation space?
So we need to be a little bit more specific than just saying AI in this space. Like some people use AI in prioritizing out of a massive amount of test cases. And making those choices and those decisions on what tests to run after a particular change. AI is awesome at that. But then again, also cloud is kind of competing solution in the same space, in the sense that you can just run all of your tests in parallel and have all of your results. Then it's about cost and whether, AI is any better. That's an open question in many cases. So you need to look at it in a bit kind of more detail on what AI does. And I do see kind of like in the UI oriented space that the selector kind of stuff has AI oriented solutions. There's many different areas where you have AI based things, but none of those have so far been practically in use in my teams. We've been doing some model-based testing, but I don't consider that AI at all. It is just modeling, and it's just a different level of abstraction. So there's nothing about learning. And again, I don't foresee that would happen anytime soon.
Does QA engineers willing to adapt to test automation? So if he is a manual tester, he starts his complete experience as a QA engineer. Now, if he has to embark on an automation journey, would he be interested? What his mindset will be like?
It depends really on a person. There are people who have so much work already in just kind of like thinking with the application, that trying to find time for spending in the details of whatever tool they need to learn. It's just time away from doing the actual work. So again, most of the people that I work with are exploratory testers. There's no manual test case execution in my world. It is always deeper research, investigative work. And that needs to be done. And automation very easily is time away from that. Those who are executing manual test cases might already be in a completely different skill profile than the people that I work with. That's kind of a good thing to understand. And everyone is very willing to learn things in automation. I think what we're missing is that the practical way of teaching people so that it would be layered, so that they don't have to understand all of it at once before they can start being useful. That's what is usually missing. And I find that I'm teaching even people who have never written a line of code, test automation programming, just writing that code like business people, because it's not that complicated scripting. You call set of API calls with various parameters, and you can always share amongst the team. You can share the work for multiple people so that they can start with the easier stuff or the stuff that they are specializing in. So again, for me, it's more on the, I think people would like to learn it, but it's not very useful for companies, first of all, to give up on all the testing, thinking testing, because everyone is just learning automation. There's still the results that need to be provided in testing in general, and automation isn't always helping there. And the other part is kind of like paying a senior salary for someone who is starting to learn automation at working hours. There's only so much you can invest on that area.
Yeah. Right. My next question is top 3 things that you expect in a test automation tool. If I mean, you said you rather have your own you have your own frameworks.
Yeah. So first, well, I would say first one is being able to do things early on. So kind of like getting early feedback and using it for specification purposes as well. So I need to be having an environment where we can, have conversations early on when the code doesn't yet exist. That's one of the things I need. Another one that I need is granularity. So when it fails, I need it to fail in a way that doesn't lead me into a week of investigation of what's wrong today. It needs to be specific. So that's another thing. Like, however visually I understand what's going on, granularity of that feedback needs to be in place. And maybe the third one probably would be around scaling, particularly environments, data sets, and somehow making sense of this idea that when we create a single test, we can turn it into many tests without doing the same work again. So better understanding of the concept of kind of plugging in either new environments or new data into the same test cases.
Yeah. Excellent. Right. How do you say now? Obviously, I'm sure you have executed, implemented a number of test automation projects in your past experience. So if you have to, at one point, if the business comes to you and say, "Hey, is this project successful?" What metrics do you choose to say, "Okay, I'm going to gauge my test automation based on these factors," and say, "Look, now, therefore, because I met these metrics, now I am a successful test automation implementation." So do you have something in mind?
Well, I have something in mind, but whether I would use always the same ones, I don't know. I tend to first go into the people who are getting feedback from that test automation, and I ask experiences and stories of when they remember it was useful to them. Like, is it doing the work that it's supposed to, is it giving feedback to the team? Because basically why we have it around is that we can see the changes that we forget to talk about sometimes, and that we notice when things are breaking with the changes that we didn't intend that what would be broken. And well, the third one is definitely this kind of getting new environments and just being able to test them without having to set up a whole project on testing a new environment. Just kind of plug in the test automation and get in place. So I look for those results. That's kind of where I start my measuring from, kind of like, is it doing work that people find useful? So it's happiness related thing. Another thing that I very often find myself measuring is it growing, or is it kind of getting smaller? Not really in terms of lines of code, but some ways of talking about what does it cover, what does it do for us, and if we are really investing and expecting it to grow, is it actually going to be bigger? A lot of the projects that I do are kind of like starting from having very little or nothing and then growing into it's now useful. So I use metrics like every 2 weeks looking at how many tests we have now and making sure it's not going down, it's going up rather than down, because when maintaining, people very easily delete tests a little bit too easily. So again, that's one of the things that I look at. And then the other one is, well, investment basically. So if you need to have 3 people out of a 10 people team holding that test automation together, is it worth all the money that we are putting in it?
Yeah. Right. Moving to my next question. Do you accept AI-based quality decisions, right? So today, as one of the tools, some of the tools today talking about AI self-healing, and they learn and they make a decision whether your test case is passed or failed. Do you accept those kind of things, and do you foresee that happening in the future?
I don't think it's not a binary yes or no. Sometimes yes and sometimes no. So it depends on the level of risk that is related to the decision it's trying to make for me. If it's deciding on which of the automation tests we run first, but we end up running all of them over a month, that's not it's sort of a decision, but it's not really a decision.
Right.
So yes, I do accept there. If I have to trust it is it now healing my selectors? I probably would trust it on that kind of a thing, but that's not a big thing to trust it on. Are we now allowing this thing to move into production because AI says it's good? Most likely not.
Okay. Fair enough. Yeah. Fair enough. Yeah. Cool. Next is, okay. In your opinion, what is the top 3 industry trends that will change the QA landscape in the next coming 5 years?
I don't know. I think still we don't have any big trends, and we haven't had any major big trends come in for quite some time. I think the QA landscape is still struggling to just figure out how to work with new technologies in general, adapting new technologies and figuring out the kind of like how to stay in touch with the pace of change that the industry is having. Testing different technologies, it's still going to be just testing different technologies. And maybe I'm hopeful, maybe we'll figure out how to somehow categorize the interfaces so that people can understand it easier. Like again, with the Selenium stuff, it has been so complicated for people to understand that no, Selenium doesn't work for it all. Like automation isn't one thing. So maybe that kind of like understanding of different technologies come to this QA space as well. It's already in the development space. But I just think kind of like my general idea is that I believe that the future is already here. It's just not equally divided. So the next 5 years, we are taking whatever people today are doing in the most advanced companies and trying to apply it in scale in other companies.
Okay.
And imagining what the advanced companies will be doing. I don't have the capability of doing that. I think the scale is the problem.
Yeah, scaling up is a pain problem. Okay. Cool. Yeah, I think with the cloud is there, and then yes, scalability should not be a problem anymore with cloud-based infrastructures. Yeah, you should be able to scale that up.
Well, it is still a problem, but it's now a cost problem rather than a technical problem.
Absolutely. Yeah. So I was talking to one of the gentlemen in the US. So he was asking, okay, so we don't run these tests very often, but when we run it, we just want 100 instances on the go, just like that. Can we commission that just with the short notice? You know, that's the level that you're looking at. Yeah. Cool. Yeah. Thank you very much for your time. I think that's it. That's all the questions I have now. Yeah, it's very insightful what you have. Your experience really has made me think on certain things, especially on the AI, how you think and what aspects you are thinking. So definitely we'll try to incorporate these into our product and make it much better in the future.
Yeah, thanks. It's great having this chat. So thanks for asking me.
My pleasure.